Republicans in the Senate very unhappy about the Biden's failures with the Chinese balloon. Queued up, we've got Rand Paul. He says the Chinese response has been appalling in addition to the Biden administration's performance. We've got Ted Cruz said they waited too long, but we're starting with Tom Cotton, who just put it nice and simply. He said that this is nothing but a failure of the Biden administration.
What began as a spy balloon has become a trial balloon, testing President Biden's strength and resolve. And unfortunately, the president failed that test. And that's dangerous for the American people. The president was paralyzed for an entire week by a balloon. We should have shot this balloon down over the Aleutian Islands. We should never have allowed it to transit the entire continental United States. And I think there's a lot of open questions that the administration needs to answer to Congress on behalf of the American people about why they didn't.
Well, they were dragging their feet. They had to bring in that individual from China and bring him into the White House on Wednesday and sit down with him and talk to him and said, you have a spy balloon in our country, sir. Would you like to explain yourself? And he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. You're kidding me. You sure it's not a weather balloon? I think it is. I think it's a weather balloon. Let me check. Hang on a second. Hey, President. Yeah, he said it's a weather balloon. Yeah, don't worry about it. It's just gathering information on the cumulonimbus clouds. You're going to love the data that we get from it. Just trust us. And the Biden people were like, well, okay, I guess we'll just let it float out over the ocean for a few days. Tom Cotton's not buying it.
I think part of it is the president's reluctance to take any action that would be viewed as provocative or confrontational towards the Chinese communists.
They had a meeting coming up.
What's provocative and confrontational is sending a spy balloon all across America.
Totally.
But second, I do.
They had a meeting with Blinken and Xi, and they did not want that to go off the rails. It was going to be the big event of Biden's foreign policy to sort of rekindle relationships there and push this all past the COVID era and, reunify the countries. And it got derailed because the Chinese aren't playing in good faith, obviously. And they've already embarrassed the Biden administration many times before. In fact, the last time that Blinken met with them, he scolded them. Blinken read some stupid statement that somebody at Berkeley wrote. And he said, hey, we in the United States condemn your treatment of the Uyghurs. And the Chinese said, what did you say, you little punk? First of all, look at your streets. It was 2020, I think, or right after the elections. Look at your streets. It was BLM all over the place, right? He said, your streets are burning to the ground, racist, bigot, idiot, white man. Don't tell me what to do in my country. And Blinken was like, whoa, he's never been talked to like that before. And so what do they think? They think that sending a balloon across is just like another, like they're probably laughing about it, honestly. I bet they got balloons all over President Xi's mansion right now. They got red balloons all over the place right now. He's just laughing it up.
I do believe the administration wanted to salvage the Secretary of State's trip on Friday night, and they got through Thursday afternoon. Thankfully, civilians in Montana and the Billings Gazette identified this balloon and blew the whistle on it, and finally the administration fessed up to the American people. It took another 12 hours for the Secretary of State canceled what was already an ill-advised trip. So I think there's a lot of answers for the administration to provide the American people.
Yeah, we need to know a lot more about this. What a joke. All right, so Ted Cruz is here. He says the same thing. They basically waited way too long. Should have just been an obvious thing. This is America, baby. We shoot first. Here is Ted Cruz.
Listen, I want to start by doing something that I don't do very often, which is commending Joe Biden for actually having the guts to shoot this down. That was the right thing to do. That is finally absolutely what the president should have done. Unfortunately, he didn't do that until a week after it entered U.S. airspace. He allowed a full week for the Chinese to conduct spying operations over the United States, over sensitive military installations, exposing not just photographs, but the potential of intercepted communications. And more broadly, I think this entire episode telegraphed weakness to Xi and the Chinese government.
Totally.
And to illustrate why, I would just ask one hypothetical question. Imagine how this would have played out if nobody had taken any pictures of the balloon. If nobody in Montana had looked up and noticed this giant balloon.
They wouldn't have told us.
If it wasn't in the news. We know that when the Biden administration knew about the balloon, they said nothing, they did nothing, they didn't shoot it down. And at the end of the day, I think the only reason they shot it down is because it made it into the news, and they felt forced to as a matter of politics rather than national security. That's
Everybody was beating them up over this thing for a long time. The pressure was too much to bear. So they had no choice but to shoot it down. And at that point, right, it was already, this whole thing was already through middle America, right? By the time that enough people kind of got eyeballs on this thing and there were demands and calls to shoot it down. In South Carolina and Tennessee and other places, there were news people communicating to sheriffs, tell them not to shoot at the balloon, right? People wanted this thing gone. But the Biden administration didn't want to derail their long planned trip to China. And so they just let it float overhead. And if they could have gotten away with it, they wouldn't have told us about this at all. It wasn't until people started finally getting pictures of this thing that there was action. So our last clip from Congress is Rand Paul. He's very upset about this. And Rand Paul is on Fox News on Sunday, and he's explaining what he thinks about this whole balloon situation.
You know, I think it's appalling. If they want to let us know that it's an accident, don't you think they would want to apologize?
Yeah.
The fact that they've already got their...
Sorry, we wasted millions and millions of dollars, not to mention a $400,000, $600,000 Sidewinder missile to take out your trash floating above our skies, gobbling up our information. If this was a mistake or an accident, how about an apology? Send us a, box of chocolate and some flowers, and let's see how it goes.
Back up and they're resisting and talking about retaliation doesn't sound like much of an apology. If there is an innocent explanation for this, and it doesn't seem that there is at this point, but if there were, they should be apologizing. But either way, the Biden administration should have the Chinese ambassador come in to speak to the Secretary of State, and there should be a full examination of the question. With regard to what they should have done, we need a commander-in-chief that's able to respond and a national defense that is able to respond within seconds to minutes to penetration of our airspace. So this sort of long...
Not a week, not enough time for the Chinese to, meander into the White House for a sit-down meeting. Pick up the phone. It's not authorized. It's got to come down.
On out that we let this drift over the ocean to Alaska, across Canada, and then when they finally decided to do something, it still took them 4 more days.
Crazy.
This really is probing our defenses in a way. Even if there was no surveillance on board, they've gotten a great deal of information as to how sluggish the Biden administration is in their response. So if you decide to shoot it down a week later, you probably could have made that decision a lot quicker when it was over a deserted part of either Alaska or before it crossed the coast of Alaska. So this looks very, very weak in the eyes of our enemy, and I think was a huge mistake. But at this point, moving forward, what they need to do is they need to demand a full apology and explanation. If it was supposedly civilian, they should feed us all the data they took in and show us what they...
Yeah, let's see those cumulonimbus clouds.
Absorbing. And if they're not going to show us that, we tend not to trust that they're telling us the truth.
Yeah, let's see what those weather patterns that they were studying look like, right? If it's really useful data, I'm sure they'll share it.
It's perplexing. Over 6 million people died, and some people say as many as 15 million people died, and we haven't had...
This is a question about COVID and about the ongoing relationships between the United States and China and about the investigations into all of this stuff, where it's all commingled, it's all intertwined.
One hearing. If you tell Democrats that baby's plastic in the baby bottle is causing cancer, they've probably had 25 hearings on this. But 15 million people die worldwide, at least 1 million Americans died, and not one hearing. Some of it is conflict of interest. We have many scientists in our country and around the world who are funded by our government, but they're also funded by the Chinese government directly. Some of this is not fully known because they're not disclosing this. When I asked Dr. Fauci in committee about this, he said it was none of my business.
China's paying everybody, including people like Hunter Biden.
And that a law protected these people. We know that 1,800 scientists in the NIH received $193 million.
Woo-woo.
This is not chump change. This is a good deal of money. We need to know which companies are paying them, and they should not be on any committees approving. So if they work for Pfizer or Moderna and they get a couple $100,000 a year in royalties, they can't honestly sit on a committee approving these vaccines. So there's a lot that needs to be known, and I'm still trying very hard to get Democrats to come on board. Once we can get one Democrat to sign a document request, the NIH, I think, will start to honor their commitment to the American people and release this information.
We'll be looking forward to that information when it comes out.
I think there's an in-between solution where we don't, have an embargo and no trade with China. I'm not for that. but at the same time, I'm not for sending them any money. We still send research money over there. And what the House Intelligence Committee released in an unclassified report about a month ago was that our money is going to U.S. universities, and then it's going to military research in China. Not even civilian research, but actual military research. The Academy of Military Medical Sciences in China gets money from U.S. universities. And
U.S. money from the taxpayer goes to U.S. universities or to the government, then to the universities, then to China, to the Chinese military. And after everything we've been through over these several years, after all of the burying of information and the silencing of critics and the suppression of the truth, we're still funding all of this. This is still going on. They're spying on 100 million Americans through TikTok. They're flying balloons overhead. And a sitting senator, okay, somebody who is on the Homeland Security Committee and who is a ranking member on that committee, who has access to all sorts of intelligence data, is telling us this stuff right here openly. We're still funding the Chinese military. The United States government is funding the Chinese military through this convoluted chain of custody of money.
Fauci would say nothing to see here because there's an intermediary, and he says, oh, because we subcontracted, it doesn't count. No, it doesn't count. We should not have taxpayer money funding military research in China. It's extraordinary that this still goes on.
It quite is extraordinary.
The biggest damage isn't so much, and I haven't seen the intelligence of what we think that.
The question to Rand is, how much damage has this balloon caused between the United States and China or to our national security interests?
I think the biggest damage isn't so much, and I haven't seen the intelligence of what we think they've gathered, which is probably damaging. But I think more damaging than even any surveillance is assessing our response time. And like I say, since we've entered into the nuclear age, there are responses that have to occur within seconds to minutes. And the fact that this administration would dither for days over a balloon, I think
multiple meetings,
gives
phone
pause
calls
to us about how well we're protected and whether or not they have the ability to make decisions that would have to be made in seconds or minutes. So I think by probing our defenses this way and showing a level of ineptitude that is, I guess, surprising, it isn't good, you know, as far as telegraphing this to the rest of the world. And the thing is, if you're going to shoot it down finally when it reaches the Atlantic Ocean, why didn't they shoot it down when it crossed the coast into Alaska, in a remote part of Alaska, or even before it got into Alaska? They had to have seen this coming. And if they didn't see it coming, that's even worse. So, you know, we will have hearings on this. And as, you know, we're already in talks with the Democrats. We should have bipartisan hearings on this. And I think ultimately we will. But, you know, if we can't detect a balloon, we're in a world of hurt as far as defending this country.
Real quick, Senator, you have been raising your hand
on the debt ceiling. But anyways, that's Rand Paul. Absolutely appalling. Says the Chinese, they know what this was. If they were really gathering useful information, certainly they'll pass it on to us. We'll teach our grade school kids about the cirrus clouds up there at the top of the skies and so on. But that's not what it was at all. It was a spy operation. They know it. They should be apologizing, and they're not. So he's going to evidently hold hearings. We'll see what the House does as well. There's going to be a lot more to come. But we also have to ask ourselves whether Biden's going to address this at all. Anyways, tomorrow, the president is scheduled to deliver the State of the Union, February 7th on Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. So that will be after this show is over. And I do not intend to live stream it because it's going to be just brutal. Where can I watch it? I'm sure others will be live streaming it, but that is coming out tomorrow. They are already fencing up the Capitol building. You can see what it looks like here to make sure that it is nice and safe for our cherished and loved leader to give his presidential address at the Capitol. But there will be more on this. I'm sure Congress will start to investigate thoroughly. And when they do, we will continue to cover. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for subscribing and following along and for liking this video wherever it is you're watching. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.